Well, I feel as a satyr, there are many people who don't understand the race. They see us as a bunch of forest-dwelling, panpipe-blowing individuals, but we're far more than that. You must understand. There's a cultural aspect. We have festivals and the like, and some of us don't even like panpipe music. We're much more of perhaps a flute appreciation society that I can think of at least three other people who don't necessarily like panpipes. Although I will admit there is a certain tune hoof tapping enjoyment that one derives from panpipes. They by no means define our race at all. There's far more to us than meets the eye. Hello and welcome to this episode of How to Be a Great Player. My name is Guy and today we're talking about owning your race. Now, race, of course, in terms of role-playing, we're talking orcs, goblins, Klingons, Vulcans, Daleks and the like. So how do you own your race? How do you make your race, well, basically your own? We're going to be looking at several things. We're going to be looking at what is existing in terms of the racial context for your particular species that you're playing. We're going to look at how you integrate with your GM, and then we're going to look at the rule of three. What is the rule of three? Well, stay around, and at the end of the video we talk about the rule of three and how it's going to make your role-playing that much more interesting and entertaining for those around you. So let's look at what is, when we unpack the existing details around your race. So when we look at owning race, we've got to look at what is already in place. I must also remember to contract these a little bit more. So what is already in place? For satyrs, for example, for orcs, for elves, what is already in place? What's been established in literature that you can draw from? What is there that you can look at? So when you look at elves, there are very many different types of elves. You have the Pratchett elves who live in a dream kind of world and are evil and sadistic. You have Tolkien's elves who are aloof and long-lived and calm and peaceful most of the time, except when they're invading Mordor. You have the traditional high elf, the wood elf, the grey elf, the sun elf, the drow, the dark elf. What has been established before, and what are the notes and points of interest for that particular race? Let me get out of the way here. What are the points of interest that you can bring to your race? Now, far too often we look at race in terms of a mechanical perspective. What does the race add mathematically to my character sheet? We don't look at what are the points of interest that my character can bring. Now, almost all alternative races, aside from humans, and even humans, this applies to particular ethnic groups of humans, have some very curious points of interest that you can bring that have been established in previous bodies of literature and the like. You can find those in most rule books as well as online guides and things and videos like this one, for example. So bring that, a look at it, add some notes, add some ideas to your PC. Oh, I see. Orcs traditionally have a warfare-like society. Okay, well, let me put down there that they're a big fan of sport, because sport is an extension of warfare, so they say. So maybe my character likes sport. It's an interpretation of an existing piece of literature already, and it just pushes your character that much more into the realm of unique, interesting, and memorable, and a character that other characters will want to interact with, rather than just being, oh, he's an orc. What does that mean? He's green and he's got tusks. Well, bravo. So do all of the other orc NPCs out there. You want to make yours a PC, you've got to take it a next step. So we're going to do that by talking to the GM. You're going to go to the GM and say, all right, well, orcs like warfare, and I think sport is an extension of warfare, so could my character be a sportsman? Perhaps there is an orcish game that my character used to play, and I would like to incorporate that into my character. The GM might suddenly come up with a completely new sport that are now played by all orcs and perhaps dwarves, just for flavour, that they can all participate in. A Blood Bowl kind of approach sort of thing. Well done, you've just successfully created a very unique character and added to the world that your character and all of the other players' characters are going to be adventuring in. You've helped your GM come up with a new twist and possibly add in some new adventures as well, just by looking at how you can make your race your own. So by adding in story ideas, by looking at things going, well, maybe not all satyrs like panpipe music, as has been established by Greek literature for the last 3,000 years. Maybe that's not exactly what they like. Maybe they like harp music, or maybe they're more guitar-like. Who knows? You can create a much more interesting character, much more dynamic character, and one that's more interesting. Now, mechanically, you need to speak to your GM. Let's say, for example, you really want to play a Drow character. That's the Dark Elves from Dungeons & Dragons. But there's a lot of mechanical negatives that come with playing a Drow. There's sunlight sensitivity and the like. It's got less and less over time as more and more people have wanted to play these dark-skinned individuals. But there are still some negatives. Perhaps you go to the GM and say, well, I would like to play a Drow who has grown up on the surface, because there's a community of Drow who have forsaken the Underdark and have decided that they want to live on the surface. So there's several generations of them. They're a little village known as the Sun Drow, perhaps, or the Sun Dried. No, that's derogatory. Sun Drow. I think the Sun Drow is quite a nice name for them. And their skin is not necessarily as dark. It's more of a blue colour, as opposed to the dark purple as described in the books. It's more of a blue colour, and the hair has got not so much stark white to it, but has started to become flecked with browns and blondes and that sort of thing. All kinds of things that can be added to the character to make them just that much more interesting. If you want that kind of thing, you must talk to your game master. You must talk to your GM about what can you do to make the character that more interesting. Again, this is not advocating that you rewrite the race from the ground up and start right from the very beginning. It is about making sure that you align what you're trying to bring to the character with the game. And by talking to your GM, it cannot possibly hurt. It can only benefit. Unless the GM says, you know what, I'm really not happy, I'm really not comfortable with the idea of orcs having a sport, or of the Sun Drow. I don't think that works really well for my world. My Drow are all living a mile below the surface. It would be very strange to have these Drow that live on the surface. I think that would be a unique character. It wouldn't be necessarily an entire culture that's been created. And there's nothing wrong with that either. Your GM does have final say in their world and in the experience that the other characters are going to have of that world. So talk to your GM is a very important thing to do. Now, the rule of 3. When you are creating a new character, or at least when you're trying to breathe life into a new cultural aspect, or trying to make the race your own, I always talk about the rule of 3. 3 actions, 3 words, 3 customs, 3 pieces of food and drink, and 3 celebrations that you should add to the character. So this is a list of 15 things that you will have, and you shouldn't really need more than 15 unique culturalisms or racisms, if you like, to make the character feel as if they've come alive. You can obviously have more, but the more you add, the more you become a potential source of irritation for other players rather than inspiration. And the reason why I say that is, let's look at actions. 3 actions, cultural actions. Now, when we talk about 3 actions, let's say, as an example, we look at the culture of I'm trying to think of an interesting one straight off the top of my head. Let's look at the culture of taking your hat off whenever you enter into a building. In some cultures on Earth, that's seen as being the absolutely correct thing to do. In other cultures, why take your hat off? Just keep it on. So that's an action that your character can take that makes that race unique. Perhaps orcs believe it's bad luck to cut their hair. Perhaps they don't. Perhaps they believe clean shaven is better. What are the 3 actions? 3 different things. So take their hat off when they enter into a room, perhaps. Take their shoes off when they enter into a room. And then the 3rd action might be that just before dinner, they make the holy symbol of the square house with the triangle roof. Maybe that's what you want to add. 3 physical actions that your character is going to go through. Then I would add in 3 words. Jalon Trow, for example. Jalon True, depending on how you want to pronounce it, is supposedly the Romulan greeting from Star Trek. This took many years of me furtively searching the internet to try and find out what the words were, because Romulan wasn't necessarily a language that had been as developed as Klingon had been. Well, it has been subsequently developed further and further, but by going Jalon Trow, immediately the character is associated with being Romulan. Or Kapla from the Klingon language for success, Kapla. Doesn't really matter. If you are claiming the race, I would come up with 3 words that you're going to use on a fairly regular basis. Cheers, skål, kampai, various toasts that are used frequently. So if your character has a word for hello, some sort of guten Morgen, however, whatever it might be, then they have a celebratory shout, yeah, whatever, and then they have some kind of finishing move, sayonara, whatever, you can come up with it. Using those 3 phrases over and over again will again ground your character as being from that particular culture. If they are Orcish, it might be more guttural. If they're Elvish, you might want to go and try and find some Gaelic words to inspire you to come up with Elvish terms for those sort of 3 things. Again, I only advocate 3 because it's easy to remember 3 things. It's not so easy to remember 53 things or an entire language. In terms of customs, food and drink and celebrations, we talk about the same thing. Customs, obviously, it might be that whenever a woman walks into the room, everyone stands up, or whenever a woman walks into the room, everyone sits down. It entirely doesn't matter. I beg your pardon, this flu is killing me. If you come up with some customs that you do periodically because of your culture or your racial background, it helps to create a very interesting character. Food and drink, I would always advise that you come up with unique food and or drink for that culture or race. Terry Pratchett's trolls from his Discworld series are all made out of different types of rock, and their particular food is completely and utterly poisonous for humans because it usually contains sulfuric acid, so that the rock can absorb and dissolve inside the mineral salts and all those kinds of things that the trolls consume. So there are instances where you might say, well, let's say orcs, and I keep going back to orcs, let's choose something else. Gnomes. Let's say that gnomes have got a particular drink known as a Fizzwizzer Upper Downer. And the Fizzwizzer Upper Downer is basically a long, tall glass, and inside of the glass is another glass. And when the 2 contents are mixed together, it causes an explosion. It would send you rather down. But if you drink them correctly and at the same time, when they mix with the saliva in your mouth, it causes a pleasant strawberry-like sensation in your ears, and your eyes start to see the color of a dog barking, and you have a general upper. It might be something as complicated as that. It might just very well be that they like to eat sandwiches rather than to eat their meat and bread separately. It doesn't matter. Come up with 3 food or drink items that are unique to the race, and you start to add in flavor. Well, I start to hand around the Pomari bread. What's Pomari bread? Well, Pomari bread is made specifically by my people from wheat and oats and things, and we mix in the blood of our enemies as a whatever. It doesn't matter. You come up with it, you add it to your racial attributes, and it starts to make the race feel that much realer. Celebrations, I always advocate celebrations at the end of a successful campaign or at the end of a successful adventure. How does your race celebrate? Do they take the blood of the enemies and wipe it ceremoniously across their faces? Is it something much more delicate like that, and they exchange gifts with one another? Well, I have brought you a little gift to exchange with you for having successfully completed that dungeon or navigated through that asteroid field. It's entirely up to you, but by taking this list of various activities and actions that your character can take and giving 3 items per each of those, it creates a very interesting shorthand introduction to the race, and it makes us want to know more about that race. It makes it feel as if you, as the player, are the authority on that race. And hopefully, by having discussed it with your GM beforehand, all those things that you come up with, you must take to your GM and ask if your GM is happy to incorporate them into their game. If they are, you have contributed to the world that your characters are finding themselves in, and you have started to put your own imprint upon that race and changed it indelibly for all of time to come within your role-playing group. It is an experience. It is something that will certainly create a character that is well worth remembering. Until next time, however, I wish you and yours the very happiest of playing. It's in our culture to hit the subscribe button and the like button and the goblin button. We press them each 3 times, not once, not twice, but thrice. 3 times we click on each one of those to make sure that the little button changes colour. That's what we do in satyr culture. What do you do in your culture? Well, I hope that you hit it at least once, but 3 times is the charm. You trust me on this one now.